mystic, prophet, seer of the future. Nostradamus, arguably the world's most famous astrologer. He is credited with forecasting some of the most dramatic and shocking events of the last 450 years.
It's extraordinary how people want Nostradamus to have been right.
Did this French prophet really see these major disasters? It's time for historians and astrologers to examine Nostradamus's calculations and attempt to decode his prophecies as we open the mystery files on Nostradamus. The beginning of a new millennium, and the September 11th catastrophe, reputedly predicted over 450 years ago.
Latitude 45, the sky shall burn, the great new city shall the fire draw nigh, with vehemence the flames shall spread and churn, when with the Normans they conclusions try.
Desperately seeking ways to make sense of this terrible act, it takes just a few days for people to connect the words of 16th century astrologer Nostradamus with the tragedy on 9/11/2001. Historian Ian Wilson has pieced together the story of Nostradamus's life and work.
What amazed me was how quick something like England's Daily Mail was in associating Nostradamus with having predicted the event.
The Twin Towers attack is a recent example of the writings of Michel Nostradamus being linked to modern events. This prolific astrologer drew up thousands of predictions. But his fame has endured because of this single book, Les Prophéties. Within it are 942 strange predictions, which, since their publication in 1555, have been attributed to many of history's major turning points.
In the case of World War II, his references to Hister were regarded as being references to Hitler. You can go back and Napoleon has been considered, the Great Fire of London has been considered.
Over the last 4 centuries, many people have believed that Nostradamus had foreseen such conflicts as the French Revolution and the great wars of the 20th century, and even details like the assassination of American President John F. Kennedy, and finally, a great apocalypse. But the true meaning of his prophecies remains elusive, almost as much as his own life story. Modern-day experts are now piecing together the facts and uncovering the secrets of Nostradamus's prophetic talents. He is born in 1503 in this small rural village, Saint-Rémy-de-Provence in southern France. He does not start his working life as an astrologer, but as an apothecary, traveling the countryside peddling his cures. It is only in his late 40s that he turns to a career in astrology. No one knows exactly why Nostradamus starts foretelling the future, but the skills for this new work would have been gained during his days as a student. In the 16th century, astrology is considered a precise science, with careful calculations required to reach the correct predictions. Such techniques need to be learned. Evidence of Nostradamus's training comes from the nearby University of historic Montpellier. This enrollment document reveals that one Michel de Nostradame from Remy signs up as a medical student in 1529. At this time, medicine and astrology are intrinsically linked.
It was before astronomical instruments had taken an understanding of the planets to a completely new and different dimension. So people really did still think that Mars or Venus might be influencing their everyday actions.
Monica Azzolini is an expert in Renaissance science and astrology.
Astrology was fundamental for astronomy, but even more so for medicine at the time. All continental universities would have had a professor teaching astrology as part of the medical curriculum.
During his studies, 26-year-old Nostradamus would have to learn about anatomical maps called zodiac men and how to compare them with astrological charts in order to calculate his medical treatments.
There is the practice of casting a chart at the moment the patient falls sick, and using this chart would help the physician provide a diagnosis and also a prognosis.
They believe that the workings of the body are influenced by the positions of the sun, moon, and planets. At Montpellier, Nostradamus would have received some of the best astrological training in France. But nearly 2 decades later, now living in Salon de Provence, he appears to be using these skills for a different purpose, that of foretelling the future. Peter Le Measurer has spent more than 10 years analyzing in depth Nostradamus's prophecies.
We know he wrote at least 7,280 predictions, and most of those are in his almanacs.
The majority of Nostradamus's predictions come not from the Prophecies book, but from almanacs, booklets of predictions for the year which he publishes from 1550 until his death in 1566. To supplement his income, Nostradamus also draws up horoscopes for private clients, predicting the highs and lows of their personal lives. These almanacs and horoscopes are not only important as a source of income, they make Nostradamus famous.
There can be no doubt that Nostradamus, in his own lifetime, achieved a huge reputation, not only with his own country of France, but overseas.
This shows the high level of belief in his powers of prediction. In the 16th century, people are trying to understand the world around them.
Everybody assumed that the end of the world was nigh because disease and famine and death and war, they were all over Europe.
The prevailing sentiment in the Renaissance was a mix of fear and belief. So the only thing that could save you from fear was belief.
Nostradamus not only recognizes this need, but takes full advantage of it. In time, he becomes known by the highest powers in France.
He put in 1 or 2 intriguing predictions. He says the king needs to watch for it this year, and that, of course, is what caused him to be called to the royal court.
Having entered the circles of high society, he becomes a favorite of many royals, including Catherine de' Medici, Queen of France, and her husband, King Henry II.
King Henry II of France consulted Nostradamus's almanac each day. Crowned heads consulted him because if a prince was born, they wanted to know what future that young prince might have. And then ordinary people consulted him. People wanted to know how long they would live, whether they would inherit a fortune.
When Prince Rudolf becomes next in line to rule the vast Holy Roman Empire, which covers most of Central Europe, it is Nostradamus who is called to draw up his horoscope. However, the story becomes more complex. There are others who, during Nostradamus's lifetime, fundamentally question his talent. Nostradamus is not the only astrologer in 16th century France. There is some serious competition in the prophetic market.
One diarist speaks of Paris, which had a population of about 200,000, that there were 30,000 people practicing astrology. Now, I don't believe that figure, but I think that does give you an indication that astrologers were a strong profession at that time.
His astrological rivals are far more critical of Nostradamus than his royal patrons, as the archives of the Bibliothèque Nationale in Paris reveal.
You show yourself to be so ignorant that it is impossible to find anyone to whom you are second in ignorance.
It is certain you have no idea how to calculate by the sky, nor by any table.
Don't you see how much the language of this vile driveler is inane? How can you support this man who mocks you with his self-confidence?
He certainly attracted some vicious comments from fellow astrologers.
They accuse Nostradamus of bad practice in drawing up his predictions. There is one obvious root cause of this criticism.
You can attribute this to a lot of jealousy. These people, resented Nostradamus's fame. They would try and criticize him any way they could.
But there is also some historical evidence to suggest their complaints could have foundation. Historians have discovered that Nostradamus may not have completed his earlier medical and astrological training at Montpellier University.
There is preserved a record of Nostradamus's registration as a medical student, followed almost immediately by striking out.
This second registration document appears to show that Nostradamus is expelled from the school. His name is struck off the student list with a note in the margin citing his earlier profession as an apothecary or quack as the reason. At the time, apothecaries, deemed a lesser profession, are often barred from becoming physicians. There is also further evidence to indicate he leaves his course early.
In 1533, Nostradamus is recorded as a physician in Agen, and that shows he certainly wasn't continuing his work at Montpellier.
The medical degree takes 9 years to complete. But Nostradamus is already a practicing physician in Agen, over 270 kilometers to the west, just 4 years after he starts his education.
It seems unlikely that he finishes his course at Montpellier. I think his astrological training was something he picked up along the way.
Nostradamus's critics could have a basis for their claims that his prophecies are flawed. To search for evidence of mistakes, experts have analyzed his prophetic work. Few of his horoscopes have survived, but the details of one that has, as transcribed in a contemporary diary, can be compared against historical fact. In the horoscope of one Antoine Suffren, written when he was young, Nostradamus says he would become bearded, brown-teethed, and bent-backed. He would quarrel with his brothers and live until 75. In reality, Antoine turns out clean-shaven, with good teeth and straight-backed, has no family squabbles, and dies at 54.
Nostradamus made a whole series of fundamental errors in that instance. This is the interesting thing. When he was specific, he could be wildly inaccurate.
However, experts think Nostradamus has a get-out clause.
Astrology in the Renaissance is believed to be a predictive science, is a conjectural science, and therefore it can't be precise. But you leave room for free will. So astrologers are remarkably skillful in leaving enough room for maneuver and enough space for other things to happen.
Suffren's horoscope is drawn up when he is a child, leaving plenty of room for his own free will to kick in as an adult. The loophole with horoscopes may explain, even justify, the errors in prediction. The only way to get to the heart of Nostradamus's astrological skills is to examine the birth charts on which his horoscopes are based. Modern-day astrologer Paul Wade sets out to test Nostradamus's methodology And as he explains, this is not an area for debate.
When you're drawing up a birth chart, your calculations are either correct or they're not. Prophecies, they're open to a certain amount of interpretation, conjecture perhaps, but calculations are either right or they're not.
Wade is looking at some of Nostradamus's birth charts, which are used by astrologers as the basis for a person's horoscope. The chart is a symbolic view of the heavens at the precise time and exact location at birth, a snapshot of the sky. He has drafted his own charts to compare against Nostradamus's work.
I have taken his birth data as Nostradamus had it on the chart, using largely the same conventions he would have used, pretty much from the point of view of just checking his maths.
The chart is made up of distinct elements. The first are the 12 constellations, or signs, which sit in a narrow band called the zodiac. Within this, the planets, sun and moon, travel, moving in and out of the various signs. Astrologers then subdivide the chart into 12 sections of a person's life, called houses. The chart shows the exact position of the planets within the signs and houses at the moment of a person's birth. These calculations are the basis for the astrologer's horoscope. If any were wrong, the resulting horoscope or interpretation would also be incorrect. Wade has examined 2 birth charts, that of Johannes Rosenberger and Prince Rudolf.
I didn't agree 100% on any of his calculations, but the majority were within a couple of degrees. Some errors, I think you'd be nitpicking to come down on a guy 500 years ago for that.
But there appears to be one mistake in the Rudolf chart, which is significant.
The moon was actually placed in the wrong sign.
Wade has calculated that the moon should have been in the sign of Cancer at the time of Rudolf's birth, whereas Nostradamus had placed it in Gemini.
The moon is one of the most important astrological features. Somebody with the moon in Gemini needs to talk, needs a social life. Someone with the moon in Cancer needs a home and family. It's a completely different interpretation. So that was a big error in terms of calculations.
Wade has also found some serious mistakes in the layout of the charts. Some of the planets and other astrological features are placed in the wrong houses.
It appears that only 2 of them were actually plotted in the correct houses. So that is pretty appalling. If you've got 8 out of the 10 chart features in the wrong house, it throws your astrological technique into serious doubt.
These inaccuracies are exactly what enrages Nostradamus' contemporaries.
If you are interpreting completely the wrong placings, then, by definition, your interpretations will be flawed.
If Nostradamus' astrological skills are unsound, the predictions in his well-known book, Les Prophéties, are therefore also called into question, because he claims in its introduction that these prophecies are drawn up through astrological exegesis or interpretation. Peter Lemessurier has painstakingly examined each prediction in this book. He has discovered damning evidence that Nostradamus produced his forecasts by plagiarizing earlier books.
There are 942 predictions in the book. We've traced about 655 of them back to earlier books. And of those, 139 are taken from a really important anthology of prophecies from the time called the Mirabilis Liber.
The Mirabilis Liber is a collection of prophecies from medieval sources published in 1522, 33 years before Nostradamus' Les Prophéties, and it appears not to be his only source.
Nostradamus drew a great deal on the past. Various characters appear in his verses: Hannibal, Nero, Alexander the Great, Julius Caesar, and in his almanacs, incidentally, Pompey, Augustus Caesar, Mark Antony. They're all in there.
Lemessurier thinks these classic texts are the basis for most of Nostradamus' predictions. The prophecy connected with 9/11 is a clear example.
There were two Nostradamus verses that were commonly quoted about the Twin Towers disaster. Perhaps the main one was the 97th verse of Century 6. I have translated it as, "Latitude 45, the sky shall burn. To great new city shall the fire draw nigh. With vehemence the flames shall spread and churn, when with the Normans they conclusions try."
Le Measurer has decoded each section of the prophecy.
Well, New York City isn't on latitude 45, it's 41 and a bit. It's Naples. Naples is Neapolis in Greek, new city. And the Normans, what on earth the Normans are supposed to have to do with multicultural New York, I'm not too sure. So it's obviously a reference back to an event of 1139, and it refers to the Norman capture of Naples, when Vesuvius, right next to it, remember, the sky shall burn, to great new city shall the fire draw nigh. Vesuvius was in eruption, and at the time, I say, the Normans were attacking the city.
His prophecies seem to be a patchwork of ideas, copying from old predictions and by recycling historical events.
Nostradamus based his prophetic work on the idea that history repeats itself. The idea being that history is made by human beings and human beings don't change. Therefore history doesn't change, it keeps coming around again.
Our experts believe the evidence is clear.
I'm quite confident that Nostradamus has no capacity to predict the future.
I imagine Nostradamus could predict the future in much the same way as you or I could, but not much beyond that.
Yet, such is the mystique surrounding Nostradamus, that for over 4 centuries people have chosen not to question too deeply, instead selectively interpreting his words to fit events. However, one prediction is crystal clear, because it never happened. Despite the popular belief that he forecasts an apocalypse, Nostradamus' predictions actually continue into the 4th millennium and then simply peter out.
The only thing you can say and take some comfort from is the fact that if he could predict the future, then we're okay until about 3797.
But if the past is anything to go by, these revelations about his prophetic talents probably won't stop people wanting to believe that Nostradamus holds the key to the future.